Drug overdose deaths are hitting record highs across America, and it's not just an inner city problem. Now, one local group is taking dramatic action to save lives. Let's talk about it.
Welcome to My Healthy Mind. I'm your host, Michael Hunter, and this is my co-host, Elizabeth Atkins.
Hello.
My Healthy Mind is a show where we're tackling taboo topics. Nothing is off limits. We discuss problems that people have had that are real. We make sure that we have an expert that is giving us that side of the story, but we never want to have a show without the triumph, somebody overcoming whatever the adversity was. And we know that our viewers love when we talk about it. Elizabeth, what are we talking about today?
Michael, we're talking about something very sobering, the record number of overdose deaths from drugs across America, and the problem is even worse in Michigan. So we have a group called Families Against Narcotics, whose president is a Macomb County judge who's leading the charge to save other families from tragedy by offering support groups. And we have members from the group here today, including a father who just lost his son to an overdose from heroin a few months ago. And then we have a young man who was a drug-addicted college student who became homeless, desperate, finally hit rock bottom and turned his life around. And now he's living his dream as a musician to help other people. So it's really inspiring, and it's full of guidance to help people who are going through the problem of addiction. So stay tuned for an informative and inspiring 30 minutes of information that can help you and your family.
Tyler, is everything okay?
Yeah, Grandma, everything's fine.
We are this close.
We're this close.
We are this close
Of wanting to.
to making history.
This close to changing the world.
We are this close.
This close. This close to making sure no child suffers a crippling disease.
Ever again. This close.
We are this close to ending polio.
Ending polio.
All we need is you.
This close.
If we don't act now, we may lose this chance forever. Help Rotary make history at endpolionow.org.
Drug overdose deaths have quadrupled across America in recent years, and it's even worse in Michigan. With us today is someone who's working aggressively on the front lines to stop this problem and to stop it from claiming young people's lives here in Michigan. Judge Linda Davis, welcome.
Thank you.
You are the founder of Drug Court in Macomb County District Court, and you are the president of Families Against Narcotics.
Correct.
Yes, and you are working across the state to stop the drug epidemic from claiming lives. Tell us how you're doing that.
We started about 8 years ago in a small community in Michigan called Fraser. And a lot of parents came together that had lost children or were struggling with addiction in their family. And we decided we needed to be proactive and do something to stop these deaths. We started just going into schools and educating, but our program has grown to where we are now talking to doctors. We've partnered with hospitals. We are working on changing protocols of what doctors are doing as far as prescribing. We're working in the school system. We work with the police officers. We've looked at every sector that's touched by addiction, and we're trying to pull them together to bridge the gaps between prevention, treatment, and recovery.
So when you guys are working every day, do you see that there's an impact with your program if somebody has to go versus if they don't have to go, from a legal standpoint?
Yes, with my drug court particularly, I mandate that they attend a once-a-month fan meeting. We do that because we hope to bridge the gap between families and the recovering addict. Oftentimes the person with the addiction has pretty much burned all their bridges with their family, but they need a support system to be successful. So we found that by mandating that they go to a fan meeting and bring a family member or a significant other with them, that we start to reunite the family, and then they're willing and able to work as a cohesive force to combat addiction. Often the families are doing enabling behaviors that they're not even aware of, but when they're in a room with 100 other parents that have gone through this, and those parents are sharing what they did that successfully worked, all of a sudden light bulbs start going on and people start acting different.
And do you have any statistics that prove that this works?
Yes, when we first started our drug court, we were mandating that they attend this once a month meeting. And we had about an 86% success rate with participants. We then suspended it thinking maybe we were overloading the recovery person with too many hoops to jump through. When we did that, our statistics dropped drastically to the low 60%. So we decided to mandate it again. It was only once a month. We mandated it again, and the statistics went right back up to 86% success.
Wow, that's phenomenal.
Right.
And with that kind of a success rate, I know you're conscientious about threats that may impact that rate. So there's some people who believe that the legalization of marijuana is going to have a tremendous impact on the use of heroin. And what do you think about that?
Well, I can tell you just from my experience, and I work with literally thousands of addicts on a yearly basis, I've never met one of them that did not start with marijuana use. People don't go out and just become heroin addicts. It's a progression. They start with drinking, it moves to marijuana, it then moves to the pills and prescription drugs, and then it ends up in desperation with heroin.
How bad is the problem?
It's huge. It's a societal problem. We consume 97% of all opiates that are produced worldwide in the United States, and we only make up 4% of the population. We have become a pill-popping nation. We take pills for everything, and then we don't expect our young people to follow suit with that. They think that because they're legal, doctors write them, that they're safe. So we need to get them out of the medicine cabinets and into safe disposal sites so that they're not readily available for our young people.
Terrible. Judge Davis, thank you for all of this. We look forward to hearing more later in the show. But coming up next, we'll talk with a father who tragically lost his son to a heroin overdose just a few months ago.
Piano? Is everything okay in there?
Just a minute, Grandma.
It began with my big toe. That was my first amputation that I had.
Berger's disease, it's a vascular disease brought on by smoking.
My fingers started to go piece by piece.
First it was my left leg. After my left leg, it was my right leg. And so now I'm a double amputee, all from smoking.
My tip to everyone is, don't believe that this can't happen to you, because it can.
You can quit. For free help, call 1-800-QUIT-NOW.
We're back with Gary Shafer, who lost his son to a heroin overdose just a few months ago. Welcome, Gary, to My Healthy Mind.
Thank you for the time.
You're very courageous to share your son's story, but also to offer help to other parents to spare them from this tragedy. So tell us what happened to Eric and what you're doing to help them.
Okay. Eric was a normal kid growing up. He played sports. At about 17 years of age, 11th, 12th grade, he started to drink, started to smoke pot, started to do pills. The pills led him into an addiction to heroin. This led into him getting into legal troubles, drinking, and the whole type of stuff like that. As parents, we really didn't know what to do. So we spent many years just struggling. Where do we go? You're shameful. You don't want to do things. My wife and I went to some support groups, which are many out there. We learned about the disease itself and what our son was going through. And after that, we set rules for him. He went to Florida for a 6-8-week rehab. We went down there. He says, I'm ready to do what I need to get clean. He came home. He had been to school to be a chef, so he was a very good cook. He found jobs here, and we set rules for him based on what we had learned from the groups that we went to. You're legal, you go to AA or whatever type of support meeting you do, so we forced rules on him in order for him to live in the house. He did extremely well. He was clean for over 2 years, and then I could sense stress building up in him. He started to dive back into some pills to reduce the stress, and I could sense something was wrong, and then he went into heroin use, and we think it was the very first time he tried heroin in 2 years and a few months, and he overdosed, and my wife found him on the floor.
Wow. And when he was going through the addiction, how did you recognize that it was alcohol, and then how did you recognize it was marijuana versus the pills and ultimately the heroin?
The drinking was basically finding bottles in his house and that type of stuff in our house. And pot, he got caught with pot from the police at school. The pills, we found out through friends that he was getting pills from friends. So that's kind of how we started to know. Heroin, we actually saw the bruises on his arm. So that's when we kind of like, what do we do? And you keep it quiet. So we went years just struggling, going back and forth between him and us, because they will do anything to continue using.
So the shame, the stigma, the embarrassment, being involved in a support group, does that help lift the shame and make it easier for you to get help and talk about it?
Oh, it does, because you're dealing with people, you are sitting with people who have lived through it. And we say it's the cheapest therapy you can get, because these people have lived through it. There's been people there for 10, 15, 20 years, and they still go. And even though whoever may be is clean, because it keeps them on the track of what really they need to do also, because it's a give and take of how you work this with the child or the spouse, whoever it may be. But it helps you learn what's going on, and it gives you strength that I'm doing the right thing. And eventually my wife and I started to let people know about it. And that takes a great burden off of your chest that this is what I'm dealing with, okay? And you're not looking for somebody to feel sorry for you, but it's kind of like you want to share it with other people and say, don't take everything for granted, especially drinking and smoking as a phase of life, because that's what people used to tell us. Oh, it's just a phase, he'll get through it. It wasn't for him.
And tell us about your shirt and the significance of
Well,
the shirt.
FAN has a run each year, a 5 and 10K run, and we got a team of 60 people together, and we ordered these shirts, and it's Eric's Iron Chefs, because he used to love that show. He says, this is the only show where they really know how to cook, and he would tape them all, so we went with Eric's Iron Chefs as a team name.
That's awesome.
To honor him, yeah.
Gary, thank you so much for sharing your story today.
Thank you so much for the time to share and help others.
Welcome. Coming up next, we'll hear more from Judge Linda Davis about how Families Against Narcotics is helping spare other families from this type of tragedy.
I was feeling so alone.
I was going through a really difficult time.
I didn't want to bother anyone.
I didn't think they'd understand.
It was tough at first, but I did it.
I'm glad I asked for help.
I asked my teacher.
I asked my dad.
You can do this.
Whatever it is, ask for help.
If you're thinking about suicide or need support, call the Trevor Lifeline. Trained counselors are there to help 24/7.
Hannah, is everything okay in there?
Just a minute, Grandma.
We're back with Judge Linda Davis and Gary Shafer. We want to ask you, what can parents do who are struggling after they notice the signs that their children or young adult children might be using drugs?
If I were to go back when I started to see him starting to go down that path, you really need to seek to understand what they're going through. You have to understand tough love doesn't mean to shame them. It means to set strict guidelines and structures for them. I let them face the consequence themselves. If it's a legal problem and they have to go in front of a judge, Davis, put him or her in front of her and let them feel the pain. Once you start to see them going down this path, unfortunately, a lot of parents want to step in for their children, and I'll be honest, we did the same thing because he got caught with pot at school. And okay, how can you alleviate this?
But Judge, you said that if you see them going down this path, then there's a high probability that it may be too late.
Well, it's never too late to help your child, but you're not going to save them from addiction. Once you notice all of the signs, the poor hygiene, the change of friends, the sleeping all the time, the weight loss, they're already addicts. And so what you need to do at that point is you need to surround yourself with parents that have gone through this, get involved in support groups. You have to learn a new way to love your child. You don't ever stop loving them and supporting them, but you have to do that in a very different way. Loving an addict is very different than loving a child that's not an addict. And you only learn that from going to meetings and being around parents that have gone through it. You can't save them from addiction. You can encourage their recovery.
But if deciding to stop using comes from within, only the individual can make that choice and take action. What can parents do to help force it?
You really can't force someone to get there. You have to let them hit their bottom. And I hate those terms because it sounds like you're letting them fall. But it's sort of like what Gary said, is letting them face consequences, letting them be responsible for the actions that their addiction is causing. If you sugarcoat it all, you're just keeping them there longer. Let them feel what life is going to be like if they choose this path, but always be there saying, you know, there's another way. I read a book one time called Moments of Clarity, and most addicts don't get clean because of a tragic event in their life. They don't get clean because they watched a friend die. They don't get clean because of a car accident they caused. They get clean because one person looked at them and said, you know, I see hope in you, and there's a different way to live your life. It's that moment of clarity that then begins the recovery process, and then the family can surround them with love.
Did that help you and your wife? Because you said at one point you were on different pages, but you learned that it's a disease.
It's a disease.
And now I got hope to heal.
Right.
We learned to understand what he was going through, and back to her point, there is consequences to face, and the support groups, you learn, because you really have to get strong and courage, because you're going to have to make some tough choices that your child is going to have to go through. And when you see what other people have went through, that's your support system that you can get on the phone and say, you know, talk to someone instead of just sitting home alone and just welling in your grief. Because if you're in your grief, you don't see the signs of help. That's the way, and that's the same thing with my son's death. I can wallow in the grief and not see the good signs. And that's what really keeps us through his recovery and through his death now.
Yeah, silence and isolation are probably the two biggest things that breed addiction and staying in addiction. And we've done that in our society too long. We hear opiate use called the silent addiction, and it's because families are shamed that their child has a disease. We need to move past that and educate the public that this is a disease. We need to help these people, not throw them to the curbside. It's really important. It's why addiction has gotten so big in our country, is we don't talk about it enough.
That's our mission on My Healthy Mind, to talk about it, and we are so grateful that you've both joined us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up next, we'll talk with a young man who was a student at Michigan State University when he started selling and then using drugs. He ended up homeless and desperate for help. We'll find out what happened.
I was feeling so alone.
I was going through a really difficult time.
I didn't want to bother anyone.
I didn't think they'd understand.
It was tough at first, but I did it.
I'm glad I asked for help.
I asked my teacher.
I asked my dad.
You can do this.
Whatever it is, ask for help.
If you're thinking about suicide or need support, call the Trevor Lifeline. Trained counselors are there to help 24/7.
We are this close.
We're this close.
We are this close
Of wanting tea.
to making history.
This close to changing the world.
We're this close.
This close.
This close to making sure no child suffers a crippling disease.
Ever again. This close.
We are this close to ending polio.
Ending polio.
All we need is you.
This close.
If we don't act now, we may lose this chance forever. Help Rotary make history at endpolionow.org.
We're back with Judge Linda Davis and Kenny Spear, who's going to share his phenomenal recovery story with us.
Yeah.
Kenny, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm just so grateful to be a part of this. So, yeah, my story is very similar to most folks who use drugs and alcohol to excess. So, I was a normal kid my entire life and went to Chippewa Valley from Macomb County. Did well enough in school to go to Michigan State University, go green, and it was there where I really started to use drugs to an extreme. I started with pills, started selling pills. I was working at the cafeteria, making $6 an hour, and I had an opportunity to sell and make more money for myself. So I did that, and in the process of doing that, curiosity got the best of me, and the opiate outbreak started with the Vicodin, then the Oxycontin, and continuing to graduate to harder drugs. And that was the demise. And obviously this is the condensed form of my story and the chaos that happens in between of people dying, friends dying, people overdosing. All of the madness that happens eventually led me to Detroit, to where I couldn't afford the pills, and I started using heroin regularly in an abandoned house, not too far from the station that we're at right now. And continued to do that until I had reached a breaking point, and I was willing to surrender. At the time, I was 115 pounds, soaking wet with cement boots on. I was a little man, and scared, dying inside. And it was only in that moment where I finally became willing to surrender and call my dad for assistance. And by the grace of God, I've been able to go to Sacred Heart and Treatment Center, and I've been sober ever since by the grace of God. So.
Judge, when you have a person like Ken who says, hey, I get it, I got to be able to tell someone else, how cautious are you, or do you caution him and others like him that the struggle can still be there, even though you're now prominent, even though you're on top of your game right now, you got the rest of your life ahead of you, and will this struggle still be there sometimes?
Yeah. Addiction never goes away, and Kenny and I talk about this all the time. We were laughing on the way down here that he said, man, I never thought I'd be in a car with a judge, and I truly never thought I'd be riding with a heroin addict. But but we remind each other, these young people working with us reminds them constantly of where they came from, and you can never forget that as an addict. You always have to be able to connect with that pain so that you don't let yourself get back there again, and you're always playing maintenance. You go through a rough time right now. One of our young people is going through a rough time right now, and he has surrounded himself with people like Kenny who are going to hold him up and walk him through the process of staying clean right now. It's an up and down battle.
Tell us quickly some steps that people can take if they fear they're addicted or they know someone they love, someone who's addicted.
First of all, don't do this alone. You have to surround yourself with a support group, whether you're a young people going to recovery meetings or a parent. And it works best when both parties are going to recovery groups. There's FA, Al-Anon, Alateen, all of those support groups, Nar-Anon for parents. And then there's AA, NA, Gamblers Anonymous, whatever your addiction is that you can go to as a young person, and it connects you with people that are going through similar things. If you do that, those people will direct you to the right recovery programs, to the inpatient programs, to the outpatient programs, and you will build a support system around you that will walk you through this process.
Excellent. We are so grateful that you're both here and that you've shared this powerful information that can help so many people. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. And coming up next, we'll talk more about how to get help for someone who has an addiction.
I was feeling so alone.
I was going through a really difficult time.
I didn't want to bother anyone.
I didn't think they'd understand.
It was tough at first, but I did it.
I'm glad I asked for help.
I asked my teacher.
I asked my dad.
You can do this.
Whatever it is, ask for help.
If you're thinking about suicide or need support, call the Trevor Lifeline. Trained counselors are there to help 24/7.
Tyler, is everything okay?
Yeah, Grandma, everything's fine.
We're back talking about Families Against Narcotics and all the wonderful programs that they offer to help people prevent tragedy from drug overdoses. If you want more information, you can go to familiesagainstnarcotics.org and you'll find a lot of resources there. Michael, what was the most powerful moment in the show for you?
For me, Elizabeth, the most powerful moment was when Mr. Shafer said that he had to use tough love to reach his son. And how many people have to use tough love, but use it properly. Not in a sense of looking down on the person that is addicted or with any disdain, but to recognize that this is a disease and that the person needs to be surrounded by love, some patience, and embraced. And it's a delicate balance without trying to enable somebody, but to be able to be there for them and to still have that tough love. That was very powerful to me.
That is powerful.
And what about for you?
Well, I like that they all emphasize the importance of remembering that it's not easy. The reality is temptation is always there when you're an addict, and the pain is always there if you lost someone to an overdose. So that reminder that it is a struggle, but finding the support is the key to having the strength and also using faith to stay strong and carry forward and help others.
Absolutely. When the judge said that they rely on each other when those weak times come, that was very moving as well. And we know that this story definitely had the impact on our viewers as it has had on us. It's a very real problem. That's why we're having these shows during Recovery Month. And we want to make sure that you stay in touch with us through Facebook, through our Instagram account, through Twitter, and go to us online and watch our previous shows. Our upcoming show is going to be very, very interesting as we talk about yoga as a means to overcoming addictions. So make sure you tune in next time on My Healthy Mind.